So we can wrap that up then. Where does the balance fall on the objector's case? Well, H39, we've got a willing landowner, we have a well-contained site, we've got no environmental constraints, we have a modest extension, which is a logical rounding off to the existing estate, and we've got good proximity to local facilities. By comparison, what we get with H26 is an extension north, outside of the existing built area, decreasing the separation to the industrial estate, which is everyone agrees is important to retain. And therefore, in spatial planning terms, in the absence of any showstoppers, the most appropriate solution is H39 in the way that Ms. Bartle has already described. So that's everything on the objector's case. Turn to Miss Jukes and her comments. The site area, we'll go away and check that. That's a minor point. Happy to check that. We may even be able to do it today, but of course, happy to check that. In terms of the developable area, we've been really clear, and I started my discussion of H1 this morning on this point. We are allowing flexibility. These are not targets, nor are they caps. A scheme can come forward, and I think Ms. Jukes accepted that a scheme could come forward for the level that the council has estimated. It might just be in a different configuration to that which her client's already considered. Absolutely fine. That's for development management, that's not for today. In terms of the western boundary, nothing that you heard about that slither of land in the council submission leads to a different conclusion. At the very worst case, there are appropriate uses, for example, landscaping, which could be deployed in that area as part of formalising the edge of the site. It need not lie neglected or as a slither. But none of that is inconsistent with what the council has done in its assessment. No, that's everything from us for now.
And just on Mrs. Duke's point about there not being hedgerows along the edge of the settlement to the north, and therefore, to paraphrase, it would look daft to have a hedgerow along this western boundary. What does the council say to that?
I think the way that the clause is phrased in the policy deliberately doesn't describe how that boundary should come forward, because it would be part and parcel of the consideration of the scheme, the layout of the scheme, and how the proposal would emerge on the site. And a matter for development management colleagues to consider in the context of the site. It may be that a more open boundary could be considered appropriate, but it would again very much depend on the nature of the scheme, and at the moment we're not presented with, whilst there's been indicative layouts, we're not presented with anything more formal than that. The need to secure a level or some degree of boundary is required here to ensure that there is no further encroachment into the green belt, and we're delivering some level of permanence to this part of the village.
And so just in terms of the local characteristics, you will see on the ground, but as you move west, so leave the village along Church Lane, moving west, you do have what I'm going to loosely call shelter belts. You do have groupings of trees, you do have denser areas of vegetation, including at essentially at the end of the next field. So it's not an uncommon typology just from that local character area. It's not something that we would accept would automatically be out of place in the manner suggested.
Does that, Mr. Henderson, deal with the point that Ms. Jukes made about what sort of thickness of boundary? Well, so what you're telling me is that you've got no hard and fast about it. It'd be a matter of development management in due course.
Correct.
Yeah.
But what we can say today is that there are local examples which could be drawn on as typologies to inform that, both those which are more dense and those which are perhaps less dense. And there is flexibility, which for your purposes today illustrates there is a solution, there are no showstoppers, and allocation is therefore appropriate.
Councillor Gallery.
Thank you. I live on Lorraine Avenue, and there is a hedgerow on the boundary of the fields. So, and there are a variety of them all the way down on that particular section of the fields, butting to the. So I think that's a bit of a red herring, really. I don't think that's too important. But they go in different ways down from Lorraine Avenue to Beck Close to Alvin Walk and so on. So I don't really believe that's a material matter in a big scheme of things here. Density was mentioned earlier as not being a requirement of the decision making. And I have already stated that H26 allows for a larger number of properties to be built that would also allow greater flexibility. I think that word was used earlier too. And therefore H26 is in the Greenbelt, so is H39. They're both comparable sites in one sense, but in terms of size and spatial accommodation, H26 provides a better option for a developer and gives the council the option to perhaps insist on some economical housing to be put there too, which has already been put at the Conifers at the other end of the village to the north on a site. There is also another site opposite the industrial estate with some 117 houses that are already close to the industrial site. H26 has a gap between it and the industrial site with the local playing fields and the doctor's surgery. So the argument that that is the wrong site for housing doesn't work real for me. Church Lane has been flooding for the last 5 years because there are damaged drainage problems underneath the ground. If you start digging into H39, you might find a few more of those as well. So there are some problems that might be, as you term, showstoppers. I don't know what that term means, really. So I would argue that H26 is a better site. Thank you.
Mr. Tozer.
Just to add into the mix, we've heard about this rising main in H39. I don't know about that, but there is a large pressurized sewer main. And from time to time, this springs a leak, which is extremely entertaining. So that might be something to worry about. Could I pick up on Mr. Henderson's comment about consultation? Indeed, we are completely fatigued by consultation, but it appears to be one way. In other words, people make their responses and views known from the village. They appear largely to be totally ignored. Certainly, we don't get direct feedback on them, and in particular, I'm not a member of the parish council, but I understand that City of York Council has made no attempt whatsoever to engage or even listen to the parish council or even respond, I may be wrong here, respond to their concerns as expressed. And this was typified for me at one of your road shows where I asked this question, how they engage with parish councils, and the answer came back, oh, we don't talk to them, they're all NIMBYs. And I thought this was really quite shocking, but it does seem extraordinary. This has been going on now, this whole discussion about this site in particular, since 1988. And we don't feel that the council, and in those days it was North Yorkshire Council, they're actually listening. Consultation is a two-way process.
Okay, what I want to do now is to take any and all final points from this side, because clearly you're never going to agree and we could go on forever. I'm not proposing that we do that. In fact, I'm definitely not going to do that. So if there's anything that you came here today wanting to say that you haven't yet said, now's the opportunity. Mr. Willis.
I'd just like to say that I find it rather depressing that in considering the impact of the additional traffic going through Beckside, the only things that seem to be considered are whether the roads are wide enough, the pavements are wide enough, and no regard seems to be paid to the impact on the people who live there. Thank you.
So what I'm going to do is go to Mrs. Jukes and then finally to Mr. Henderson to see if he has any final comments that he wants to make. I'm not going to come back to this side of the table, as it were, so if everyone's happy that they've said what they wanted to. Okay, very good. Mrs. Jukes.
Thank you, sir. I'm just going to come back to the point of strongly defensible boundaries, because we need to remember that we have several allocations within this list that are all on the edge of settlements, and the sites such as at Dunnington actually protrude into the green belt, and they haven't had the same requirement to include strong and defensible boundaries. And I'm just wondering why this site is then being treated separately and differently to all those other allocations. If it's simply the lack of a boundary at the moment, then can we please be more specific about that rather than this suggestion? I'm just really sure. To me, a strong and defensible boundary is a buffer, several metres wide, with more than one row of planting, rather than it simply being a fence.
Can I ask why you think that?
Experience of planning applications over different local interpretation, and the whole point of the local plan is that it should be clear and provide clear advice to applicants and everybody else reading it as to what's expected. I'm just struggling with this strong in defence and how you might interpret it, because it is down to interpretation, and that worries me.
Do you think that garden fences going along the back of the rear of rear gardens, for example, might be a strong defensible boundary?
They're certainly strong. They have foundations and they're posts. Defensible as in you'd have to take it down. Yes, but does the policy say that, or is it open to interpretation? That's my worry.
Well, I think it's. I think the council is saying it is being deliberately flexible. You know that's what they're going to say when I come to Mr. Henderson and Ms. Bartle in a minute. Before Mr. Henderson does say that, was there anything from you, Mrs. Jukes, last chance saloon?
No, sir, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Henderson.
Okay, well, there's very little new there, sir, so I'll be very brief. Flooding, flood zone 1, not a showstopper. Traffic, same point. We've been told it's not all about pavement width. No, reply the MPPF. Is there evidence of an issue of highway safety? No. Do you have a residual severe cumulative impact? No. No showstopper there either.
Just in terms of highway safety, seeing as you raise it, we haven't been there yet, so we don't know what it's like. But we were told earlier that it's a sort of family kind of neighbourhood around Beckside, and that children play on the street. Is that right? I just wonder what you think about any highway safety issues in that context.
So I can't tell you whether or not the children play on the street. I'll leave that for you to.
You haven't been
observe.
there to join them?
I haven't, no, but officers have. But the important point on that, though, sir, is you have a public highway of an appropriate specification, left in such a manner that it would continue naturally south into this as part of an extended estate. Put it another way, is this somewhere where an appropriate transport solution which is safe can be found, yes, it is. No indication that that isn't the case. The density mix point is really a mix point rather than density point. Policy H3, aligned with the SMAR, gives the council the development management control to bring forward the mix of housing that is most required. The size of the site isn't something that influences the application of that policy where it's tied to the SMAR. And then Miss Dukes and strong and defensible boundaries. Yes, I make the obvious point there is flexibility, but Miss Dukes has canvassed a range of possibilities in front of you, a buffer with multiple layers of planting, or a hedge with back garden style fencing, and the council's already explained there's a variety. The point is, those are solutions. There's no indication that an appropriate solution from that mix, bearing in mind what the council's already told us about the local variety and what we've already submitted to you about the local characteristics, can't be found. So there's flexibility. The developer has flexibility to bring forward what they consider to be suitable in that regard. Again, no showstoppers, policy works effectively. And it can indeed include or have a relationship with that sliver of land at the same time. All the more reason to have flexibility there.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay. What I'm going to do, because we're getting reasonably close to working our way through the sites for discussion today. So I think I'm going to take a short sort of 20-minute break now and then return and reach our conclusion for today, rather than, taking a longer break for lunch and all the rest of it shortly. So I now make it 12:29. I adjourn the hearing to resume at 12:50. Thank you.